do a YouTube video on it. So we can move on to this. Look at that. Get real close.
All right, guys, Murph's here, and today we have a very interesting situation. So I got a request to do an update review on a previously reviewed rifle. Nothing unusual about that. What is unusual is it was actually something out of the Friendly Fire series. Now, for a long time viewers of the channel, you know what the Friendly Fire series is, but if you're new to the channel, the Friendly Fire series is when I review guns out of other people's collections in order to remove my personal purchase bias, as well as bring you guns that I may not necessarily buy myself. Excuse me, I've got some post-nasal drip going on with the seasons changing and all that kind of stuff. Guns that I would not necessarily buy or have not yet purchased, and setups that I may not necessarily pursue myself, so that I can apply my methodologies, thought process, and all that kind of stuff, and we can discuss them here on the channel. Now, what you guys may not realize about the Friendly Fire series is there are two ways that a Friendly Fire video gets made. One, somebody offers up a gun for review, and they just, hey man, I just got this, I think it'd be really cool if you put it on the channel, and I get it from them that way. Or B, I know that person is about to move away, that I'm no longer going to have access to their collection, and I know there are things in the collection that I would like to review, and they are willing to let me review them. Kind of like a whole thing going on there. So most of the time, or you can generally presume that I probably don't have free access to these guns all the time. In fact, when I review them, we can also reliably assume that I'm probably not going to have access to that firearm again. However, this rifle came to me at the owner's behest originally because he had just bought it. He did, in fact, want me to review it. And then I happened to still be near him and able to review the rifle. Which rifle we're talking about? Well, that would be the Anderson Manufacturing Utility Pro. So somebody requested that I review this rifle. I contacted the owner, and the owner was like, "Oh, well, I guess I better get on updating that rifle," and he did. So I'll go ahead and roll in a picture of what the rifle used to look like. So this is that girl in high school, and this is her now. All right, so let's go ahead and get into this. This is what the Anderson Utility Pro has developed into. Now, before we get into the individual features of this rifle, I want to kind of touch on something that was in the previous video. If you're interested in what got us here, the original rifle, go ahead and check out the link in the description. Advice that I've given several times over the years to people who are looking to get into AR-15s is to buy a relatively inexpensive AR and build with it. And what I mean by that is you can run out and you can get something fairly cheap. This rifle was originally picked up for under $500. And then as you train around the rifle, as you go to courses, as you go to competitions, as you work your own time on the range and all that kind of stuff, you can develop what it is that you want to change, where it is that you feel that the rifle is holding you back, and you can make those changes at an already lower price of entry instead of getting something like a Daniel Defense coming in at $1,900 and then deciding that there are changes that you want to make to the rifle. This kind of gets into like a build versus buy discussion, which if you're interested in that, I have done a discussion on that on the channel here prior. I'll put a link to the description in the video. Or excuse me, I'll put a link to the video in the description. That came out backwards. So, a lot of times, there's a lot to be said between like buy and build, and buy the rifle that you want or build the rifle out the way it is that you need it. But if you're somebody who's just getting into rifles, tactical rifles, you may not really know what you need. You know what some influencer is out there pushing. You know what your buddy says are all the things that you have to have. You can even look at my video discussing like minimum requirements for AR-15s and work off of that, or AR-15 rifle setup. Both of those linked in the description. Or tactical rifle setup, I guess I should say. But none of that's knowledge. So yes, you could run out, buy a cheap rifle, and then have Wish.com vomit all over it with just really junky parts and all those types of things because you're just looking to catch an aesthetic. Or you could go my route, which, sure, you get a relatively inexpensive rifle, and maybe it doesn't meet all of the requirements in my AR-15 minimum requirements video. However, if the receiver set is good, if you're dealing with a mil-spec receiver set, you can change everything else about it and still have a good rifle and make a better rifle. AR-15s are adult Legos. You can make all kinds of changes to them and all that kind of stuff. If you just go ahead and start out with the understanding of like, I am new, I do not know what I'm doing, and I need to go out there and do my due diligence and effort, time, money, all that kind of stuff, rounds on the range, in order to better develop an understanding of what it is that I need or what it is that these capabilities bring when I change out my grip, when I put a better trigger in it, and all those types of things. I still consider that to be kind of the stance of the channel, is that it's better to get a cheap rifle and build it up into an expensive rifle than it is to buy an expensive rifle or build an expensive rifle that you don't understand how to run. Running your mouth is not the same as actual skill, and it's very important to keep that in mind, especially whenever it is that you go to build out and accessorize a rifle. And that is kind of the attitude that the owner has taken towards this gun, because that was the advice that I gave him when he bought it. So let's go ahead and start talking about the pieces and parts that he has changed about this rifle. As we can see here, it has now become substantially shorter. This is a registered SPR. We have the Phase 5 little boy hex brake mounted on this thing. Now, longtime viewers of the channel know that I am not a big fan of muzzle brakes, and I can tell you that this thing has not changed that opinion at all. We'll talk about this a little bit more once we get into shooting, but I will say that it is a brake. It does muzzle braking things, that's for sure. All right, this muzzle brake is attached to our new 10.3-inch Hansen profile barrel from Ballistic Advantage's Performance Series. Now, longtime viewers of the channel know that I have a little bit of a beef with Ballistic Advantage. I put an 18-inch rifle length gas Ballistic Advantage barrel on my Mark 12 build, which I love that build. I hate that barrel. I've had a lot of gassing issues, and I still have a lot of gassing issues. I pretty much have to run 5.56 ammunition through it in order to be able to get consistent last shot hold open, proper last shot hold open. So we will talk a little bit more about the performance aspects of this barrel once we get to shooting, but I do want to go ahead and point out that it's QPQ coated. It is a 4150 chrome moly vanadium steel barrel. All of this is improvements over the original barrel, which was a 4140 16-inch barrel. Nothing particularly nice about that barrel. And really, that was one of the things that I recommended that he change about the rifle, with not necessarily a quickness. It wasn't really like a 50-meter target. It was more like a 100 or 200-meter target that he needed to get after. But, so 4150 chrome moly vanadium steel is a minimum requirement for me. 4140 gets you to the range. 4140 gets you out there practicing. And when you kill that barrel in this whole budget concept, that's a great time to go ahead and swap it out. The reality is most people don't put enough rounds downrange to really burn out a barrel in their lifetime. But if you're somebody who's looking to get into that type of lifestyle, that's something to consider. All right, our handguard. Oh, this is a carbine length gas system, by the way. Our handguard is the BCM 9-inch MCMR M-Lock handguard. Nice and lightweight. Very slim, very trim handguard. This is a definite improvement over the original. That was the one that I told him that was a 50-meter target. That handguard needed to go with a quickness because it did not have anti-rotation tabs, and that is a minimum requirement for me on rifles. It was also just super cheap and chintzy and just terrible. This is an excellently built handguard. We have anti-rotation tabs. We have good, strong barrel nut lockup and all that kind of stuff. Good improvement, good investment overall. Now, what do we have attached to it? Well, here on this little length of Picatinny rail, we have a Streamlight ProTac HLX with laser. This is not the owner's, this is mine. He has still not put a light on this gun, even at my urging in the last video. Set up with a pressure pad mounted on top here because we also don't have any type of backup iron sights, something else that I mentioned last time. So, one of the great things about this having a laser is that you can utilize the laser as a backup sighting system. It's not my favorite backup sighting system, but it will work in a pinch. So I added this on here because this light happened to be, it's not on a rifle anymore. It used to be on my IWI Galil Ace, which if you're interested in that, go ahead and check out the link in the description. I have since updated that light. I didn't like how heavy that was on that particular setup. The Galil has a very weight-forward preference to its balance to begin with, and it is absolutely miserable to do off-the-shoulder reloads with that thing. So I took this off to shed a little bit of weight. How does that impact this rifle? Well, it really doesn't. This is a very lightweight setup, and I don't notice any real change to the balance or anything with this particular light setup on here. So, something to consider, bud. Get a light on your rifle. Now, why the pressure pad, Murph? We know you don't like pressure pads. Well, I do still run pressure pads on some of my setups. This specifically, though, you cannot get offset mounts for the HLX laser. So this has to work off of its integrated Picatinny mount onto Picatinny sections. You can't get like an M-lock offset mount or anything along those lines. So with that being the case, having to run it at 90, if I run the clicky tail caps, I have to do some awkward stuff if I have transitioned shoulders in order to be able to function the light and all that kind of stuff. So I have to really work my way around the rail to be able to get over to that. Whereas if I just run a pressure pad, then I can do what it is that I need to do. Now, it is important to remember that pressure pads increase the possibility of a negligent discharge of light, which, given the right set of circumstances, is worse than is just as bad as a negligent discharge of a firearm. All right, now we have this real small little nub here of a hand stop, which you could also use against a barrier if you so chose. I don't mind this. It's not bad, especially with how he runs his stocks out a little bit longer, so it doesn't really put my wrist into an uncomfortable position. Traditionally, I'm not a big fan of like angle foregrips or any of these kind of like stubby setups here on short rifles because it will put or could put my wrist at a really uncomfortable angle. So since I run my stocks in a little bit more, I would probably feel more of that on this particular gun. I prefer vertical grips. Travis Haley does a bit about how like vertical grips are stronger just because it puts your wrist into a more neutral position and therefore it's more comfortable, and also straight lines and angles are stronger or something along those. I don't know. That part made less sense, but the comfort thing is for real. That's for sure. We also have a sling receptacle here for a QD sling setup. I'm pretty sure this handguard came with this barrel and gas block. I was on BA's site earlier and I noticed that they had a combination deal going on with this handguard, so I'm fairly certain that's what he did there. But it was to his advantage because it came out good overall. All right, coming back to our receiver, we're not going to go into the full-blown discussion about like minimum requirements for me on all the receiver pieces and all that kind of stuff. You can get that from the original video, or really any video I've done on AR-15s. We are going to point out, though, that he did trade out the BCG. This is an Odinworks bolt carrier group. It is 9310. This is for sure, like the previous bolt, I don't think Anderson Manufacturing indicated whether or not it was like mil-spec or anything along those lines. This is a mil-spec bolt. This is a object or a feature that we can expect to have a lot of longevity associated with it. Now you'll also note that he has added a Magpul bolt release, extended bolt release here, which the actual nomenclature of this item is bad liver. There we go. Found it. Which is kind of a hot button topic for some people. The issue that some people have with this particular setup is that it goes into the trigger guard, and there's a concern that you might potentially accidentally come on the trigger after having released your bolt and have a negligent discharge. I'm sure that type of stuff has happened. I've worked around bad levers a couple times over the years. I've never had that be an issue, but with this particular new trigger that's in here, I could definitely understand a concern. Now, the great thing about the bad lever is you can also use it to lock the bolt to the rear. So that's pretty neat. So I don't have an issue with the bad lever. I could understand the concern, but also if your weapon's on safe, it's not going to be possible for you to accidentally discharge. In the case of emergency reload, I can understand you not placing your weapon on safe, but if you keep the weapon oriented downrange, does it matter that much? I don't know. It's a very fluid topic, that's for sure. But I've never had it be an issue. I've never seen it be an issue. I just heard of it potentially being an issue. All right, our trigger. The owner has put in a, let me see if I remember what this is called, the Rise Armament Op Mod Hex C. This is a single stage, 3.5 pound trigger, and it is definitely light. It is almost nothing. Yeah, it's like you breathe on it wrong. I don't believe this is 3.5 pounds. I'm pretty sure it's lighter than that. We'll talk about this more once we get into shooting, but immediately on the wall, very light trigger break, and the reset is almost immediately back on the wall. It is a very good trigger. Our grip has been updated. This is the, oh no, adaptive tactical lightweight grip. As we can see here, this is a plastic skeletonized grip. I don't get broken up about grips. There are only two things that I don't want a grip to have. I don't want it to be like an AK popsicle grip, like some of those stock AK popsicle grips. Super small. My hand just absolutely, they just float in my hand and they're impossible to grip. And then two, I don't like A2 bumps. That's it. Once we check off those two blocks, there's really not too much more that I'm concerned in grips. I will say that this gives you a little bit more of like a revolver type grip, which I find kind of interesting. If I had a preference in grips, it would be that they be more vertical, but I didn't find this grip to be an issue. It's kind of odd to me to have a plastic skeletonized grip because, I mean, AR-15 grips, most of them come with like hollow plastic ones. Like they're pretty lightweight, but you know, to each their own, I guess. The owner has added a backplate where he has this cutie cup where I have been running a single point sling because he did not provide me with a sling again. This charging handle is some no-name charging handle he bought at a gun show, but it is ambidextrous and oversized. I'm not the biggest fan of oversized charging handles unless I have a magnified optic, in which case then you'll have the bell that'll come over top of the charging handle, and it makes it a little bit easier if they're like extended and all that kind of stuff. But otherwise, charging handles are not a thing that I get that broken up about. I don't interact with them that frequently, mostly because like my guns don't jam that often. It's not like I use them as a part of like my reloads or anything along those lines. So never really made sense to me to like really geek out over a charging handle, but guys do. So to each their own. This is the BCM Gunfighter stock, and I am a big fan of this stock. So the like old SOP mod stocks and stuff like that, I never cared for because they had way too much cheek build up here, and it kind of felt like it was pushing me off the rifle. I like these more slim, low profile cheek builders here on these types of stocks. This, the Magpul CTR, no, CTR didn't have those. Regardless, there are quite a few stocks out there that do have like little cheek risers right here, and those are actually fairly comfortable. I like a slim stock to begin with. I like something that's going to tuck in nice in the pocket whenever it is that I'm wearing body armor and all those types of things, and this stock does a pretty good job of that. We also have like cutie cup or standard like sling loop here and all that kind of stuff, so decent choice on the stock. All right, guys, there's our upgrades. How does it shoot?
I think I pulled that one out. If not, let's go one more inch.
Okay, so shooting this thing in like an overhang or something like that, you've got all that pressure coming back down on you. Even shooting it out in the open, like I can feel it in my nose and all those types of things. One thing that I will say for shooting this rifle is that I start to notice it the more I shoot it. The recoil, well, not so much the recoil, but the blast from the muzzle brake, I notice less and less the more that I shoot the rifle. So like I shot it quite a bit yesterday, and For like the first 5 minutes, I was very aware of the fact that I was kind of getting punched in the face with pressure, and then it kind of just went away. It became less of the thing that I was focused on. I became more focused on being annoyed at everyone else at the range.
Try once. Lie once, cry once.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Oh, no problem, man. Like I said, I normally I come here at
So recoil-wise, of course, it's a 5.56 rifle. It's not terribly punchy in recoil to begin with. It does remain pretty flat with this muzzle brake setup. Now, I did run it through some drills and getting some like ready ups and stuff like that, and this rifle is very fast, very quick on the shoulder. I have absolutely no complaints with its performance on the shoulder in more dynamic styles of drills. It is definitely quick. And long-time viewers of the channel know that I'm a big fan of short, handy carbines, and this definitely fits that bill. Why don't we go ahead and talk about something that I did notice with this rifle, though, and I did notice a gassing issue. So I had a couple of times when I was shooting this, and I noticed that the bolt seemed like it was locked to the rear, but I felt like I was seeing more bolt than I was supposed to be seeing in the ejection port. Then I also noticed that sometimes when I would release the bolt, it would not feed around, and I was very confused by that. And then it clicked for me because I finished up at the range, just fired the last round, the bolt had locked to the rear, supposedly, and I was walking back to my truck, holding this rifle by the stock, and all of a sudden the bolt went home. And that's when it clicked in my head that this thing was not actually locking to the rear. The last shot hold open device, your bolt catch, was making contact against the bolt, but it wasn't actually locking it. It was just holding it there by friction. So as I was walking along and this thing just like bumped my leg or something like that, that allowed the bolt to go forward. Had it actually been locked to the rear, that would not have been an issue. And that's when it clicked in my head that we have another ballistic advantage barrel with gassing issues. Now, this could most likely be easily solved by swapping out the buffer. The owner definitely has the original buffer in here. I have no idea what that buffer was. He might be looking at needing to get an H2 or something along those lines. I haven't investigated too far in that respect. But this is my issue with my ballistic advantage barrel, and I really wanted to like this ballistic advantage barrel. I really wanted to give ballistic advantage a second chance. They have great prices on their barrels. However, given now I have a sample size of 2 barrels produced in 2 completely different years and 2 completely different like styles and all that kind of stuff, I have zero interest in ballistic advantage barrels at this point. And I hope that it is as simple of solve as adjusting which buffer he has in here, and not something that's going to be more invasive. Now, coming back to the barrel though, I do love the profile of the Hansen barrel. It's lightweight, which keeps this thing, which really aids in this overall setup being very fast to the shoulder and all those types of things. Your barrel is a source of a huge amount of weight. The handguard kind of adds to it, but your handguards are generally made out of aluminum. This is 4150 chrome moly vanadium steel. Every inch you add is a lot of weight in barrel. It's a big chunk with a hole going down the middle of it. Pretty much any barrel is. So I appreciate any time that I can get a lighter weight profile barrel that allows to have these quick whippy rifles and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so there's our gassing issue. Very unfortunate. So the case where it wasn't loading the next round was literally because the bolt was too far forward and it was actually hanging over top of the round instead of being behind it in order to be able to scoop it into the chamber. So I load up the magazine, hit the release, and then click, no bang. Run the charging handle, and then it would be just fine. And I started doing like press checks and stuff like that in order to make sure that everything was okay, not realizing that the real issue was just the bolt not locking all the way to the rear. What I really needed to do was just pull the bolt back, another inch, and then lock it to the rear.
Now that you mention it, I want, bro. That's what this rod, that's a pretty good rod.
gotta get you one.
Does it have an end on it?
It's cycling pretty good too for a new rifle.
Not bad. See?
You gotta put it on safe when you go.
There's nothing on it.
accuracy. Let's go ahead and talk about accuracy. So I shot this thing at 100 yards using 55 grain PMC X-Tac 5.56 NATO ammunition, M193 equivalent. And I got this 5 3/8 inch grouping at the 100 yards. Is that sterling accuracy? No, it's not at all. A couple of things to keep in mind. We are still shooting a Trichcon MRO. Okay, so we're shooting a red dot at 100 yards. This is not necessarily a combination for outstanding accuracy. We do have a 10.3 inch barrel, not necessarily like a, sniper's setup here. As well as we did have some windy conditions, a little bit of like shadowing going on where it was difficult for me to be able to maintain a super consistent aiming point. I did it, obviously, because I at the very least got everything on paper, which we can see, if you see those 4 impacts there to the left, was not the case all the time. So a little bit of a hasty zero was done, all those types of things. Am I making a lot of excuses for the rifle at this point? Yes. It is what it is when it comes to accuracy. Accuracy is an incredibly subjective thing. You draw your own conclusions as to the culprit, for this case, in accuracy. I will also tell you that this trigger is incredibly light. And when you're a person who's used to dealing with 2-stage military weight triggers, it's a definite adjustment. It's something that you have to get ready for. I have one precision-minded trigger. It's in my Mark 12, and that's a CMC 3.5 pound single stage. And that trigger throws me off every time. So there were quite a few times where I broke a shot before I was really ready to necessarily break that shot. Now, this is not a precision rifle setup by any means. So am I that worried about 5 3/8? No, I've turned in worse accuracy on other guns. I've had some guns that I couldn't even get on paper, both of which were Mausers, actually. I think where this winds up really thriving is in the speed in which you can conduct an engagement. This single stage trigger, being as light as it is, you could really run through some rounds and burn it down like a bill drill or something along those lines. So something to keep in mind there. Not every lightweight trigger is necessarily geared towards like making the rifle super accurate. You don't just have to think in terms of like trying to make this thing super accurate. It can also be to just rip off shots faster, as opposed to dealing with, a 10-pound mil-spec trigger. All right, guys, that's shooting. What are my recommendations when it comes to this setup specifically? Would I recommend this for duty type use? Well, with my added light and laser, maybe, other than we have the issues with the gassing, and that's going to be a big problem. Fix the gassing issues. For duty use, you probably wouldn't get away with this, if I'm being completely honest. And that's gassing issues and all that kind of stuff aside. Iron sights or sling setups, none of that matters. Most organizations will not let you run your own home-built rifle as a duty type rifle. So there's that. Maybe if you're in some small town like sheriff's department or something like that, you can get away with it. But if you're talking about like a larger police department, probably not going to let you run your home build. And for good reason, because you have things like ballistic advantage barrels that maybe need their gassing tuned a little bit better or something along those lines. Or perhaps it's important to embrace that not all builders are the same. And some people are really good at making sure that everything's torqued to spec and some people are not. And you definitely don't want to find that out when it's time, when it really matters. Okay, what about as a home defense, self-defense gun? Again, gassing issues notwithstanding, and in this setup, as we see it, because we do review guns on the Friendly Fire series in the manner in which they are equipped. You add my light and laser combination here? Absolutely. You remove this, then no, I would not recommend this for as a truck gun, which is unfortunate because it is so short. It'd be a great truck gun. But I can't imagine also touching off this hex brake in the cab of my truck. I feel like my nose would be bleeding before too long if I ripped too many rounds. If you were to just be dedicated to the idea of I'm just going to cover my bedroom door in the case of a home invasion, there's no one else I need to go out and get control of, there's no kids that I need to wrangle or make sure taken care of and all those types of things, yes, this could be a self-defense option. Once again, touching this off inside a building is going to hurt a lot, but you could do it at least once. But if you do have to come out and secure family members and all that kind of stuff, you're going to want a light. And it wouldn't be bad to have a laser while you're at it. So conditionally, I would recommend this for home defense, self-defense. Would I recommend this as a hunting rifle? Well, in most places, this would not be legal to hunt with. And if you're going to hunt with it, definitely wear ear protection, which seems to be more common now. When I was a kid, you know, it was really before the advent of a lot of like noise canceling technology and all those types of things. So we hunted without hearing protection. And, you know, maybe I'm paying for that, among other life decisions as I've gotten older and now have hearing aids. Okay, so most big game are not legal to hunt with a 5.56, depending on the state that you live in. So I've been in states where any centerfire rifle cartridge was legal for deer hunting. I live in a state now where that is not the case. This would still be a good pig eradication option, especially with it being so lightweight and all those types of things. You get it equipped for, you know, like night vision and all those types of things, because a lot of those guys that are going out there doing pig hunting are pig exterminating, and they got like a lot of money invested into it. So if you have that type of setup, that would be pretty good. That'd be fun. This wouldn't be bad for that type of application. What about as a competition setup? Well, I generally associate muzzle brakes with competition. Now, do I think that this is presently, from my results, exhibiting the accuracy that I would want to reliably take this thing out to distance? Not much distance, but if you were running competitions that primarily had you doing some like pretty close range stuff, this would be absolutely fantastic for that. Especially with this dot setup and all those types of things, you'd be plenty small to be able to work around like some tight corners, and hopefully nothing indoors because of this brake. All right, well, would you recommend this as some type of wood setup? Well, if you were talking about like bebopping around your property and like a gator or something along those lines, this would be plenty handy for that, keeping in mind, of course, of what type of threats are you going to be pursuing. If you're worried about two-legged variety of threats, then yes, this is a great option. If you're more worried about like predators, like large predators, sure, enough 5.56 rounds would put a bear down. I don't want to spend that much time shooting at a bear. I would like to get something that's going to get the job done efficiently. So this would not necessarily be my first choice. I would not go hiking with this, even though it is relatively lightweight. Still a lot of added weight that doesn't necessarily bring me a whole lot of help unless I'm only concerned about predators of the two-legged variety. All right, Murph. Would you buy this? That is a difficult question. One of the interesting things that I will point out is that when I hit the recommendations portion of this video last time, I recommended that my biggest recommendations were to immediately swap out this handguard, and then at some point in the future, swap out the barrel. I then made my personal recommendations of what I would do with the rifle, which was to build it into a 10.3 Mark 18 inspired build. Obviously, the owner erred more towards my latter advice. However, there's a couple things we have to take into account whenever it is that I'm evaluating something for purchase, specifically AR-15s. I have a bunch of tactical rifles, and I don't mind adding more tactical rifles, but when it comes to ARs, I've got to like everything about what I'm looking at in order to be able to justify the purchase to myself. So in the case of like, if I'm looking at production AR-15s, something made by a manufacturer, if it has a tail hook stock on it, I will not buy it. I'll move on to the next thing. Thank you, next. Now that might seem really weird, because Murph, you can just like take a stock off and put a new stock on. But why would I do that if I can just go find something else for the same price or lower that has a stock that I want? Like it's not like I need another AR-15. I just like adding AR-15s to the collection. I like tinkering with them. I like setting guns up in different ways and appraising different features and all that kind of stuff. And I know what I don't like, and I don't like the tail hook. So the hook is an appropriate term in this case because it's just going to grab onto everything with how that thing is produced. So in this case, if we just take the question on its surface, no, I would not buy it because of the muzzle brake. But if the price was right, and we take this conversation a little bit further into the contextual aspect of it, a 10.3 to me right now would be a suppressor host. I would be building out a tactical rifle for a suppressor host. Which means that I'm probably going to swap out whatever muzzle device is already on the gun. Even an A2 flash hider, which I'm completely fine, to go with some sort of taper lock setup for a suppressor. Now, guys, presently I own no suppressors. I plan on changing that at some point. It's just not necessarily like the money's not burning a hole in my pocket to go and get involved in suppressors and all that kind of stuff. My interest is increased. I have several guns that I have identified that I want to be suppressor hosts. But in the time that all this time, I've been doing a lot of research on suppressors and stuff like that, and I've decided that at least for the moment, I really like the concept of taper lock muzzle devices. So that's what I would swap this out to anyway, would be Griffin Armament Stealth, or any variety of taper lock muzzle device. So if we frame it that way, would you buy it, Murph? It would increase my interest if I thought about it in that way, and it definitely could find its way into my collection at that point. Another important thing to keep in mind is that I'm even more hypercritical of home builds. I'm not opposed to the idea of buying somebody's home build, but I'm gonna spend a lot of time poring over it, and I'm gonna nitpick every detail, because once again, not all builders are built the same. So that's an important thing to keep in mind when you're dealing with a system that is controlling explosions right in front of your face. So it is both a yes and a no as to whether or not I would buy this. What changes would you make to this rifle currently in order to increase that interest? Well, it would be to swap this out, get a suppressor on this thing, have a permanent fixture of a light. If it were me, I would probably run this HLX on here and go ahead and utilize that laser and forego any additional sights and see how I like that for a little while, because I have yet to have run into a condition where I had to use my backup irons. So maybe it's time to embrace a 2-in-1 option and keep the rifle a little more slim, a little more trim, and all that kind of stuff. I am both hot and cold on this MRO. I see a lot of issues where there's a discussion of like parallax and all that kind of stuff, but I also really like how crisp the dot is for me. So I don't know, some days I'm like, no, I would never do an MRO, and then other days I'm like, oh man, maybe an MRO wouldn't be so bad. So I could see myself swapping this out to another red dot, probably like a Vortex Spark or something along those lines. But it wouldn't necessarily, I don't deadline nor shame this rifle for having an MRO on it. And thus far, I've really had no issue with the MRO. I do have a bit of an astigmatism, and it doesn't bloom that bad on me. So I guess the jury's still out on that particular decision. All right, guys. I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting. It's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.